I'm Dan.
And I'm Kristin, and we are going to talk to you some more about nature and wildlife and things that you can see up at Wilderness Canoe Base and in the Boundary Waters.
Let's go check it out.
Welcome to the Nature Nest. If you come up to Wilderness Canoe Base, the Nature Nest is one of the first places that you're going to visit because we like to share with all the campers that come up here about the wildlife that they're going to experience in Boundary Waters. It's important to learn about the plants and the animals and the weather and the way that everything works together and how we can coexist well with the environment. So before we walk out and about, I want to show you a couple cool artifacts that I have here. And I'm going to start with this moose antler. A lot of people when they come up want to learn about moose, and I think when we take our walk we're going to see some additional signs of moose that have been around because there's been a lot around here lately. Another animal that we see a lot when we're on our canoe trips are beavers, and this is actually a beaver tail. And beavers are cool because you can see where they've been even if you can't see a beaver. So here's an example of that. Sometimes when you're out on your canoe trip you'll see evidence that beaver have chewed different pieces of wood or sticks. So this is where a beaver has gnawed, and one of the reasons they do this is because their front teeth never stop growing, so they have to chew to make sure that they file down and don't get too long. Another animal that's pretty common that I actually see a lot when I'm driving around are foxes, red foxes, which interestingly are not always the color red. Sometimes they're more brown or black or white. Also, snapping turtles are something you might see out on your canoe trip or even around camp. And we have two really different sizes of snapping turtle shells here. And I think when we go walk around, we'll probably see some more evidence of turtles. And then lastly, these are jack pine cones, which are pine cones from a jack pine tree, which are really interesting when we think about wildfires. And wildfires are something that have a pretty important place in the history of Wilderness Canoe Base and also the Boundary Waters landscape in general. And there's some pretty special and unique things about jack pines that we're going to talk more about when we go out on our walk.
Two of the biggest animals that we have up here in northern Minnesota are moose and bears. But in and of themselves, they're not necessarily that threatening towards you. There's a couple things you do want to be aware of though. Oftentimes both moose and bears tend to be a little bit more aggressive when they have young around them. So if you're out in the spring and you see a bear with a bunch of little bears or a moose with a couple calves, those are definitely circumstances where you want to keep your distance. And actually, it probably makes sense to keep your distance in all animal interactions. First of all, you're much more likely to see them if you're farther away and staying real quiet. And also, you don't want to be seen as any kind of threat to them, or you don't want to interact with them, feed them, or anything like that. So keeping your distance, observing from afar, and then moving along are all good policies around animals.
So most people, when they come to Wilderness Canoe Base, they really want to see different animals. They want to see a moose, they want to see a beaver, they want to see a bald eagle. And while we can't promise that you're going to see an animal, though it's pretty likely, you can almost always find evidence that animals have been around. And one surefire way to know that an animal has been here is if you find poop. So right now I can tell that a moose has been here pretty recently. These are large pellets, which tell me that it's definitely a moose. There's nothing else that could make poop that looks like this. And this isn't the only sign. If I look right around where I am right now, I can see that this tree and this one right here have been nibbled on. pretty systematically. So these are 2 signs that a moose has been here pretty recently, and I'm pretty sure that we'll see some more signs as we keep walking around.
So moose lose their antlers every year. So you sometimes can find moose sheds in the woods. The antlers start as little nubbins with skin over the top, like a membrane of skin and blood that helps give them nutrients to grow. And they grow and they grow and they grow. And then after they've reached a certain size, they start to scrape off that dead skin, and the antlers kind of harden up and they end up like a bone. And then they knock these off at some point during the year. With that said, we never want to take anything like a moose shed out of the boundary waters with us. You can take a look at it, you can observe it, and then leave it where it is for other people to enjoy. Up in northern Minnesota, we have black bears. And in contrast to brown bears and grizzly bears, black bears are very not aggressive towards people. They'll tend to run away very quickly once they see you, and they're much more afraid of you than you are of them. They do sometimes get a little interested in food, especially when they might be hungry in the early summer season. So it's important to make sure that you're keeping a clean camp. That will definitely lessen the potential for a bear to encounter food at a campsite and associate that with people and start to come back looking for that kind of thing.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about snapping turtles. And I actually used to be afraid of snapping turtles because I always thought that they were going to try to bite my toes or something when I was swimming. But I learned that snapping turtles only have this top part of their shell. There's no bottom part, so they actually can't retract all the way inside of a hard shell the way other turtles can, like painted turtles. So the reason that they're more aggressive and do that snapping motion is a way to protect themselves when they feel threatened. Like other animals we're talking about today, we can see signs of them out and about at camp. So this hole is actually where snapping turtle eggs were laid and have hatched. We're so close to the water that they are able to just crawl out of their eggs and right into the water. And so we can see there's a pretty big hole here, and we can also see the remnants of the eggshells all out and about.
Dan, you see those turtles? What kind are they?
These are painted turtles.
Oh, well, there's one swimming right there.
Up here in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota, we've got boreal forests. Our forests up here look a little different than the forests that you might encounter in your home. Up here we've got a whole bunch of different kinds of trees and plants and things interacting all in one place. So right here, just right behind me, I've got a pin cherry tree, I've got an aspen, I've got a jack pine, I've got a white pine, I've got a mountain maple, I even have a balsam back there. And this is a little different than a forest that you might walk in that has all maples or all oaks or something like that. And one way in which boreal forests maintain that diversity of the plants and trees and animals that live in them is through disturbance. One major disturbance that we experience up here in our boreal forest are forest fires. And you can actually see the remnants of a forest fire right here where I'm sitting. So right next to me, I've got a big charred, burnt out, looks like a spruce log, next to a little new growth aspen tree that's probably less than 10 years old. So when a forest fire blows through, it often clears out all of the older growth and creates space for new growth that can now grow up and reach sun. Depending on how long a forest fire takes to burn over an area, the new growth might happen rather quickly. If it takes a long time, it takes much longer for the soil to replenish the minerals that it needs to start to grow those plants and trees again. Forest fires are a component of boreal forests. So for example, jack pine cones that Kristin showed us up there in the nature nest, they actually open up most often in the heat of a forest fire. So that tightly wound cone will slowly open up and let the seeds out as it burns in a fire. And then those jack pines are quick to grow the new exposed area that a forest fire creates. The forest fire that burnt this part of where I'm sitting right now happened in 2007. And while some forest fires happen because of lightning strikes that smolder and then start to get bigger during a warm, windy day, that fire of 2007 was human caused. And so we're very careful about our fires up here at Wilderness Community we're out camping, we're making sure that we're only using fires when we need them and when they're allowed by the Forest Service. We're making sure that they're cold to the touch, that you can put your hand in the ashes when you're ready to leave a campsite or when you're going to bed for the night. And we also make sure that we keep our property where our cabins are very well fire-wise. So we cut fire trails, we maintain our sprinkler systems, and all this is to make sure that we're protecting ourselves against fires.
Some of you might recognize this spot as the riffle if you've ever paddled through it. On the left side of the riffle, this is regrowth from a fire that happened in the 80s, and it stopped right at this natural divide where the water runs through. And over on the right, this is growth since the Ham Lake fire in 2007. And in both cases, this natural divide caused a break in the spread of the wildfire. This is something that we try to mimic on our own property by making clear trails and spots around buildings to create a break in the growth that the fire can latch onto and keep burning. But this example is just a naturally occurring way that happens out in the forest.
Up here in the Bounty Waters and in other places in northern Minnesota, you see a lot of exposed rock. There's a reason for that. This area is called the Canadian Shield, and from like 1 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago, these big, huge glaciers, big mountains of moving ice, scraped very slowly over this part of the world, gouged out a bunch of what now has become lakes, and also took a whole bunch of the topsoil off. So there's not a whole lot of dirt up here, just a little bit sitting on top of a lot of exposed basalt and other bedrock. There's a couple impacts of that. It's definitely affected the sort of forest that we have up here. Most of the plants and trees and animals and things have to be able to survive without a whole bunch of topsoil. And they also say that when you're up in the Canadian Shield, you're probably not more than 1 mile away from a lake or a river. So all of the interconnected lakes and rivers up here that we paddle on in our trips in the Bounty Waters are a result of these big, huge glaciers. Hey Kristin.
Hey Dan.
What's a favorite animal or wildlife encounter that you've had up here at Wilderness Community Base?
My favorite wildlife encounter actually happened in the wintertime when the lake was totally frozen and I saw a pack of 5 wolves eating a big deer for lunch.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was pretty crazy. What about you, Dan?
One of my favorites was hearing a whole bunch of crashing at a campsite one morning and then coming around the corner to see a mama moose and 2 baby calves swimming out into the lake.
Oh, that's so sweet.